I wasn't supposed to be in the back of the shop that day. The front counter was dead quiet. Only the low hum of the soda fridge and the smell of grease in the air, when Mrs. Carson walked in, carrying a brown paper bag like it was something fragile. Her hair was pulled up, but a few strands had escaped, brushing her cheek. She had that kind of presence where you notice her before you realize you're looking calm, but not soft. The kind of confidence you can't fake. "Your dad around?" she asked. I shook my head. "Lunch run." She smiled a little, the corner of her mouth tilting in a way that made it impossible to read if it was amusement or just habit. "Guess you'll do." She set the bag on the counter and opened it. Inside, 2 sandwiches wrapped in wax paper, a bottle of iced tea. "Your mom said you've been skipping meals," she said. "This one's yours." I tried to say thank you, but it came out like I was clearing my throat. She didn't rush to leave either. Just stood there, tapping her nails lightly against the glass counter. The sound was too loud in the quiet shop. "You work here full-time now?" she asked. "Just afternoons. College mornings." "Ah." She looked around the place like she was cataloging details. The stack of repair tickets, the dust on the fan blades. Then back at me. That glance lasted longer than it should have. Not long enough to be obvious, but enough to make me notice. Her phone buzzed in her bag. She ignored it. "Your friend's still sleeping until noon?" she asked. I grinned. "Pretty much." She shook her head, smiling to herself. Then her tone shifted, lower, almost casual but not. "We can keep this just ours, right?" I froze halfway to unwrapping the sandwich. This could have meant the food, or the fact she'd come in here at all, or something else I wasn't ready to name. I nodded anyway. "Sure." She didn't explain, just reached into the bag, took the other sandwich, and walked toward the door. At the threshold, she paused and looked over her shoulder. Not fully, just enough for me to catch her profile in the strip of sunlight cutting across the floor. "You'll eat it while it's warm," she said. Not a question. The door swung shut behind her. I sat there, the sandwich untouched, my hands still on the wax paper. That night, I kept replaying her voice in my head, like I missed something, or maybe wanted something. The next time I saw her, it wasn't at the shop. It was in her driveway, late afternoon, her car hood up and the faint hiss of steam curling into the cool air. She had a wrench in her hand, though from the way she was holding it, I wasn't sure if she planned to use it or just didn't want to put it down. "You know what you're doing?" I asked, leaning against my bike. Her head popped up. "Not even close." I walked over, and she stepped aside without a word, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. There was a faint crease between her eyebrows. Not frustration exactly, more like the weight of something else entirely. I bent over the engine, checking the obvious first. She stood near the fender, not hovering, but close enough that I could hear the faint rhythm of her breath. "You've been here a while?" I asked. She gave a half-laugh, the kind that starts strong but fades too fast. "Long enough to get cold." I glanced at her. Her hands wrapped around her elbows, shoulders pulled in. Her nails were short, edges uneven, like she'd bitten them recently. Not the kind of detail you notice about just anyone. When I found the loose clamp, I tightened it and stepped back. "Try now." The car coughed, then settled into a low hum. She exhaled, not a full smile, just the edges of one. "Thanks. Guess I owe you." "You already brought me lunch once," I said. "That was different." She closed the hood. "This is something else." I wanted to ask what she meant, but she had already started walking toward the porch. I followed, hands in my pockets. At the door, she hesitated with the key in the lock. "You want water?" I nodded and we stepped inside. The place was warm, the air faintly scented with cinnamon. Not strong enough to be baking, just something that had settled in. She moved through the kitchen with quiet efficiency, setting the glass down in front of me without meeting my eyes. "You've been busy lately," I said. Her fingers lingered on the rim of her own glass. Something like that. There was a pause, not the comfortable kind. The fridge hummed in the background. I could see the faint smudge under her eye, like she'd rubbed it instead of sleeping. "You okay?" I asked. She almost answered. I saw it. The small shift of her shoulders, her lips parting just slightly. Then she stopped. Instead, she picked up her glass, took a sip, and smiled like we'd been talking about something lighter. She looked at me like she wanted to say something, but didn't, and that silence felt louder than words. It was raining hard enough to blur the streetlights when she called. Her voice was flat, almost reluctant. "The garage door won't close. Can you?" By the time I got there, her hair was damp from the dash between house and driveway. She handed me a flashlight, her fingers brushing mine for barely a second. "It just stopped halfway," she said, gesturing toward the yawning, rain-slick opening. I crouched beside the track, water dripping from my jacket. She stood close, the beam from the flashlight cutting across her face in quick, uneven passes as I moved. Up this close, I noticed the faint line at the edge of her jaw, the kind you get from holding your teeth together too long. "It's the sensor," I said. "Something's blocking it." She knelt beside me to see. Her knee bumped mine. Light, accidental, but it sent a heat through me I tried to ignore. "Could have figured that out," she murmured, though there was no conviction in it. We cleared the sensor, the door slid shut, and the sudden quiet of the rain outside made the garage feel smaller. She stayed there, leaning against the workbench, watching me with that same unreadable tilt to her mouth. "Thanks," she said. "Again. I'm starting to think you just like calling me over." Her eyes lingered on mine for a second too long. "Maybe." The word hung there, heavier than it should have been. Inside, the kitchen light was low, the room smelling faintly of coffee gone cold. She set a mug in front of me without asking, then leaned on the counter across from where I sat. Neither of us spoke for a while. Her phone buzzed on the counter. She glanced at the screen, her mouth tightening. She flipped it over without answering. "Bad timing?" I asked. "It's always bad timing," she said, then looked away. "Just someone I don't want to deal with right now." Something in her voice made me want to press. Not out of curiosity, but because I wanted to take whatever that was off her shoulders. Instead, I just sat there, listening to the soft tick of the wall clock. The space between us felt both too far and too close. She wrapped her hands around her mug, and I noticed the faint tremor in her fingers. I reached across the counter without thinking, my hand halfway to hers when she said, softly but firmly, "You should go now." And I did, but only my body left that room. I found her in the back room of the shop late one evening, long after closing. She was sitting on an overturned milk crate, flipping through a box of old invoices like they were something worth remembering. "You shouldn't be here this late," I said. She didn't look up. "Neither should you." I stepped inside anyway. The air was still, stale with the smell of cardboard and dust. A single desk lamp threw a circle of yellow light over her hands. "Your friend knows you're here?" she asked. I shook my head. "No one really asks where I am." That made her pause. She set the papers down and finally looked at me. There was something in her eyes I hadn't seen before. Not softness, not exactly distance either. More like she'd decided to stop pretending. "What are we doing?" I asked. My voice felt too loud in the cramped space. Her expression didn't change. "You're fixing things." "I'm letting you." "That's not what I mean." The corner of her mouth twitched, but she didn't smile. "I know." We stayed like that for a while. Me leaning against the doorframe, her still in that pool of lamplight. Neither of us sure who should move first. "You're different," I said, "when it's just us." She tilted her head slightly, studying me the way you'd study a reflection that didn't quite match what you remember. "And what do you think that means?" I didn't answer right away. The quiet stretched until I thought she might get up and leave. It means I think about it when I'm not here, I said. Her breath caught. Barely, but I heard it. She looked down at the invoices again, like they'd suddenly become urgent. This isn't a good idea, she said. I didn't say it was. She set the papers aside, smoothed her palms over her knees and stood. When she moved past me toward the door, our shoulders brushed. Not enough to count as anything, but enough that I noticed how warm she was. I turned to follow, but she stopped in the doorway. This, whatever it is, doesn't end well, she said without looking at me. I'm not asking about the end, I said. I'm asking about right now. For a moment I thought she might answer. She didn't. She just looked at me, like she was already mourning something we never even had. It was a Sunday, late morning, when she asked if I could help move some boxes from her attic. The air up there was thick and warm, smelling faintly of cedar and dust. She stayed below, handing me things as I worked my way down the narrow ladder. Halfway through, I found a small shoebox shoved into the far corner, its lid sagging from age. This one, I called. She didn't answer right away. When she stepped closer to take it from me, her hands hesitated on the cardboard. Yeah, she said finally. That one too. Back in the living room, she set it on the coffee table but didn't open it. Instead, she stood by the window, arms crossed, watching the branches sway outside. You okay? I asked. She nodded, though her eyes stayed fixed on the glass. That box hasn't been opened in a long time. I sat on the couch. The weight of the moment was enough to keep me from prying, but after a long silence, she crossed the room and sat beside me. She lifted the lid and started pulling out old photographs, some curling at the edges. In one, she was younger, my age maybe, standing with a man whose hand rested lightly on her shoulder. He's? I started, then stopped. Gone, she said. Almost 15 years now. I didn't know what to say. She kept looking at the photo, her thumb brushing over the man's face. You look like him, she said quietly. It wasn't said as a compliment or an accusation, just a fact she'd been holding back. That why you? I trailed off, unsure how to finish. That's why I can't decide if having you around feels like losing him again, or keeping a part of him here. The air between us shifted. I could feel her searching for the right place to set her words, as if they might break if she wasn't careful. She slid the photo back into the box, closed the lid, and rested her hands on top of it. You remind me of a time I don't get to have anymore, she said. We didn't touch. We didn't even look at each other for a while. But something in her posture changed. A small loosening in her shoulders, the faintest lift in her breathing. She took a breath like she hadn't allowed herself to in years. And for the first time, she looked at me without fear. It was late again. The kind of late where the world outside feels thinned out like even the streetlights are tired. I'd stopped by to return a wrench I'd borrowed, but she didn't seem surprised to see me. She was sitting on the couch with a blanket around her shoulders, a half-empty mug on the table. The TV was on but muted, some old movie flickering in the background. Stay for a minute, she said, without looking away from the screen. I sat on the far end of the couch. She shifted the blanket, pulling it tighter around herself, then gestured for me to move closer so it covered us both. Neither of us spoke. The only sound was the faint hum of the fridge and the low buzz of the muted dialogue we weren't listening to. After a while, she said, I don't want to ruin your life. You won't, I said. You can't know that. I know I don't want to be anywhere else right now. Her gaze stayed on the TV, but her jaw worked like she was holding back words. It's not supposed to happen like this. Maybe not, but it's happening anyway. She turned to look at me then. Not quick, not dramatic, just steady. I felt the weight of her seeing me, really seeing me, without all the careful distance she'd been holding. I can't promise you anything, she said. I'm not asking for a promise. We stayed like that, our eyes locked, until she finally let out a breath that sounded like surrender. Not defeat, more like relief. Her hand was resting on the couch cushion between us. I set mine beside it, close enough for our fingers to brush. She didn't move away. The movie kept playing, but the light from the screen barely reached us. In the dimness, she leaned ever so slightly, her shoulder touching mine. It wasn't a grand gesture, just the kind of closeness that happens when you stop pretending you don't want it. No words, no sudden kiss, no music swelling in the background. Just two people sitting too close, breathing the same air, neither of us looking for a way out. She didn't say she loved me, but she let her guard down, and that was louder than any "I love you" ever could be. I'm not sure when that night turned into a memory I keep visiting, but it's been with me ever since. Not like a wound you check to see if it's healed. More like a scar you run your fingers over without thinking. We didn't start seeing each other every day after that. There was no dramatic shift, no sudden claiming of each other's lives. But something had settled between us, a quiet understanding, the kind that doesn't need constant proof to be real. She was softer with me after that, though never soft in the way people expect when they talk about love. She still teased, still kept her cards close. But every so often, she'd let a laugh stay a little longer, or look at me like she was letting herself believe in something she wasn't supposed to. I learned patience with her, how to listen past the words someone says and hear the weight they carry, how to notice the way a person reaches for their coffee mug when they're trying to avoid a truth. And she learned, I think, that not everyone leaves when the moment turns heavy. Love, I found out, isn't always about the big declarations or the promises you can't keep. Sometimes it's about sitting in a room with someone, saying nothing, and knowing you could stay like that for hours. We never called it anything. That was part of the deal, unspoken but understood. And maybe that's why it still lingers, because it never had the chance to be ruined by the weight of a name. Even now, years later, I'll catch myself remembering the way she'd glance at me over the rim of her glass, or how she'd stand just close enough for our sleeves to brush. Those moments didn't ask for anything in return. They were enough. I can't tell you if what we had was love in the way people measure it, but I can tell you it was real. And real has a way of staying with you, whether you want it to or not. She's still out there somewhere, living her life, and I'm living mine. But in some quiet corner of my mind, she's still sitting beside me on that couch, letting her guard down for just a little while longer. And maybe that's the point. Not all love stories are meant to be told in full. Some are meant to be felt, kept, and carried. If you've ever had a connection you can't quite name, one that left you different, better, maybe even braver, you know exactly what I mean. So, have you ever met someone who changed you, even if they were never really yours?